right, we are in Esther 8. So since we're going to, what, you don't like the title, Brock? Okay. That's right. We're into a new hope. That's what I've entitled this. Since we're kind of going through this and looking at it from a narrative sense, I thought that would help you appreciate kind of the idea of what we're talking about. So when we look at this chapter now, and as we've gone through, and we're going to quickly review, but to reach this point is important. Last week we saw Haman was exposed as the perpetrator and the antagonist who sought the death not only of Mordecai, but ultimately the genocide of all the Jews. He was exposed, and as a result of that, through Esther, the king has him put to death. So now with that situation, though, remember, we talked about how that didn't complete the story. That didn't take care of the problem. And because it didn't take care of the problem, there's still tension that has yet to be resolved in the account. And that's what we're finding here in chapter 8. And that is that original decree that went out in chapter 3 by Haman's hand with the king's signet ring in his use. Okay. That is still valid. And we've got to have a solution to that particular problem. So as we lay out this particular chapter, we're going to see this roll from, okay, well, what do we need to do? Certain things need to be brought in to change this, and that's so all the information up front. And then, okay, here's the problem. That's verses 3 through 6, so that's the rising tension. The answer to the problem is going to be found in verses 7 and 8, if you're looking in your text. And then, okay, that's great now. How do we then communicate this and get this out so that it can be resolved? There's the potential then that's all taken care of, and then they're going to talk about the reaction to it, and therefore the emotional feeling from it, which is what you get from a denouement. Okay, so in this particular chapter, you still have the king, Xerxes, Ahasuerus, and he is still acting as ruler. He's consistent in that. It's tough in this particular chapter to name what Esther's role is specifically. I have it as an explorer type because she is pushing boundaries with the king now. She's resolved certain things, but now she's pushing the limits of her influence with the king, and that's my thinking behind that. And Mordecai, as very consistently, is operating as a sage of giving advice. Now, what I want you to do, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, I want to concentrate on chapter 8, but I want you to have in the back of your mind chapter 3, because there is a parallel that is written into the text about Haman's efforts in order to get his decree passed, and how Esther is going to work in order to get a different decree passed. And the wording in some cases is very much the same. Okay? And that's important just to understand how the book is constructed, the nature of the storyline, about how the arc has gone from chapter 3, where the rising action the problem begins, to here in chapter 8, when there is some sense of a different one that's going to resolve that problem. So let's go ahead and take a look at it in Esther chapter 8, beginning with verses 1 and 2. On that day, now this is key because this is the same day, remember, that we had the second banquet. So all of this has happened in a hurry. We had, in the first 2 chapters, it was very slow. You had years passing. And then from chapter 3 all the way to the end of the book is happening within 1 year. Well, this, and this middle portion of the book, is all happening within just a couple of days. Okay? From the time in which the decree goes out, the 3 days that then in response to that, the decree goes out, Mordecai comes, gets Esther's attention. She asks for 3 days of prayer and fasting. Then you end up with the day in which she is going to originally go with the king, and then this next day in which she has gone and told her business to the king. It's that day. So we're talking about within a week of all this going on. So on that day, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. Now, we go back to chapter 7. He's just had Haman killed. Now, Haman, remember, was second essentially to the king. He had a nice place. And he's just basically taken all of that and moved it over. Now, how is that going to affect? We've seen twice that you have Haman's family involved, his wife, so we know that, and we know later that there are going to be children. How is that going to affect his children then if all of his essentially possessions, his house, but his role, that's all taken away? Is that going to upset the family? Yeah, yes, because that's going to change their situation immensely. Okay, so keep that in mind. But now we see, and Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told him how he was related to her. All right, we finally had this revelation now to the king of something that, going back to chapter 2, Mordecai had told Esther not to tell. So we're getting resolution. That's what I want you to see is the resolution. And the resolution had to happen because Esther had revealed she was a Jew. Well, now she come to find out not only is she a Jew and that this affected her, but the original one who created the problem for Haman that ended up with this problem, that's her relative who raised her. Now look at what the king does. So the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman. Remember that chapter 3, he had given that to Haman and gave it to Mordecai. Now, go back and remember in chapter 6 where we saw all the role reversals. Everything that Haman thought he was going to get and it flipped around and it was all for Mordecai. Now this is kind of the tag on that. We're still got more to come, but now he has the signet ring, Mordecai does, that was used originally to sign, put the imprint of the king on that document, that original decree. And then notice this is important. And Esther appointed Mordecai over the house of Haman. So she's got the house. Now that belongs to her. She already has the part that is the queen, that is connected with the palace, that all. But now, outside of that, which is not that far away, remember the idea of where that the gallows were? It's not a gallows exactly, but the pole. Now she's got that, and she says, okay, you're in charge of that. So you have that. The important thing is not that actual thing that she'd put a family member in charge of the home while she's still in the palace. It's the fact that Esther has asserted herself in her role as queen from how the king has seen her. She now is telling Mordecai something to do. We saw the hint of this at the end of chapter 4. But it is showing and important for us to understand the growth of Esther through this book. That she begins as someone who is very humble and obedient, and as she is growing through this and through the challenge that she's facing, now she is assigning things from her role as queen, even to Mordecai. Okay, that's the setup for all this. So, you have laid out, and this is the foundation for what's happening in this account, is the king gives everything that Haman had essentially to Esther, and then Mordecai gets the role and the responsibilities somewhat of Haman. That's going to be coming up more later on, but originally what we have is he's over that house, so he's not second in command yet. That's going to be coming, but that's kind of where this begins. So we still got the problem. Okay, what is the big problem we still have out there? We've still got the decree. Okay, they're all the command, and this is important for the Persians. When the Persians gave a decree, you can't just rescind the decree. The way they operated was, once it's basically signed with that ring, it's out there. No going back. Okay, that was the way they operated. So you had to come with a workaround to deal with it. So we can't just rescind it. Okay? So that's still out there. So now that tension is going to be brought up again. So that's what we look in verses 3 through 6 to recognize this. Now Esther spoke again to the king, fell down at his feet, and implored him with tears to counteract the evil of Haman the Agagite and the scheme which he had devised against the Jews. Right? So this is the third time, I believe, that you've seen some sense of approach that she has made. And I'm not counting the original. You could count the first banquet as well. But when she comes before the king, and it's questionable because of she's even unsure at the beginning of chapter 5, but he accepts that. Then you have a banquet as a result. Then when she comes back for the second time, she's there. Now she's bolder, and she's making this accusation against Haman and laying that out. And the king responds to that. So now, that's just happened. But now, notice again what she brings in, and we consistently see how she's working this, is she spoke to the king, but notice how she does so, fell down at his feet. We're still totally, this is desperate, but it's humble, and implored him with tears. Okay, so you've got both the right attitude and emotion, filled with emotion. And what was the emotion that the king was last experiencing we saw last week? He was angry, right? And that was only when Haman had been taken out and executed that it subsided it all. So now, what is Esther wanting to, why does it matter that she needs to do this and bring all this up? Isn't that obvious? And why do we have to have this section? Because the king's point of view was his anger was directed at Haman specifically because of Esther. He did not necessarily connect the whole of it. Her job now is to build upon the anger and what he recognized that subsided, and to convince the king that the problem's still there, king. Haman's gone, but the problem still exists. That's what she has to do with this plea. So the tears are important to understand, because he connects with her emotionally. She's good at that. And to get him to understand and feel her anguish and her fears, that the problem isn't gone. She's still distraught. And he needs to see that. And that's why the emphasis and the scheme which he had devised against the Jews, that's still there. You still got to do with it. You know, you can remove a person from the situation, but if their influence is still there and all their decisions, that's still a mess, right? You've got to counteract all that. Now we see then his response. And the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So we already know what that means. I'll listen more. I'll accept you. So Esther arose and stood before the king. So now she's been humble for, no, it's okay. You come and you just talk to me face to face. So Esther arose and stood before the king and said, if it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seems right to the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes. Notice how she is paralleling her whole request to personalize it regarding her. Okay, that's important. Let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews who were in all the king's provinces. Okay? So the setup was important for him to feel the weight of this the way they did. And to do that, personalize it. In modern presidential speech writing, this is a given. All right? That is, that they're going to work in some personal kind of thing that people can relate to. You're just going to see that because it's understood that's what gets people. You know, I can give this great speech about, you know, the economy, but if I don't break it down into how it's going to affect a family of four, I failed my job, right? Tell me that y'all understand some of this. Okay, yeah. feedback is good. It's good. So you do that. Well, she's simply doing that and personalizing it. But notice the nature of the plea. So she waited to the end. You could have just said, hey, can we do something about this decree out there? But it lacks the sense of urgency if said in that way. But now at the tag, after he said, here's what it is, now let's make sure and get the impact across. For how can I endure to see the evil that would come to my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my countrymen? Now that is not just a personal matter, but it is trying to relate in a sense of how would you feel? These are my people. So she wants to make sure that the connection is not just protect me, king, but it matters to me what happens to my people. And once more, it's just so well done. I know it's inspired, but to understand is the nature of inspiration, what she had done, and how she knows this man, and she understands how to communicate effectively to him, and I would argue why she was put in this situation. So notice what we have just seen. You've got another approach to the king. He accepts that, and then you have now a begging to, we've got another problem, and she adds all the emotion to this she can so that there can be a full understanding of why this has to happen. And again, urgency. She's building up urgency in her pleas, the same way we saw in the overall writing of it to build suspense in to what's going on. So that brings us to the climax in this story, okay, in verses 7 and 8. How does it turn out? How does he respond, and what's going to be done with this problem? Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, indeed, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they've hanged him on the gallows because he tried to lay his hand on the Jews. Now that statement's important because he connected what the real problem was more general. You yourselves write a decree concerning the Jews as you please in the king's name and seal it with the king's signet ring. For whatever is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring, no one can revoke. Does that sound a little familiar? Okay, this is how that last decree happened. Okay, so, but the nature of what he does, what have we just seen once more, though, about this king? He's what? He's not, he's incompetent? You don't mince words, do you? He's a great delegator. Right? Okay, so he's going to delegate this in, he is not a details person. He's general, here's what you do, you handle the rest of it. Okay, here's what I want, you handle the rest of it. Or in some cases, oh, is that what you want? Sure. Okay, that's what we saw on both sides of this equation in chapter 3 and chapter 8 of his, shall we call it, managerial style. Okay, that's what you have. And that is, the thing that's so interesting about this to me, and we've seen earlier about how we can match this up with, it is Xerxes. Okay, because of his reputation in history, this kind of activity you don't get, and trying to square that with what everything else is. You get a few little points like when he comes back from war and he takes solace in his harem that are kind of match these things up. But you don't get a full picture of his character and style of leadership. You actually get some of that from this book. See, I thought I saw you. Say that again? Oh, okay. I said, yeah, yes, that's one of the themes through the book is the banqueting. And once more, you have that tie in because it bleeds over from chapter 7, from having been involved in this banquet where the decision was made on what to do with Haman at a banquet. Now this also, they're still in the same place. Mordecai's been called in and made another decision. So yes, we still have the idea of his banqueting with wine was a major theme. You saw it in chapter 1, you saw it in chapter 3, you saw it in chapter 5, you saw it in chapter 7, and you see, because 8 is connected to 7, the same thing. So you see how that works. And this is going to come up in the future in a different way. But that has been a theme. Even in chapter 4, you remember, what you saw in contrast was Esther insisting on fasting and prayer. It was the opposite, okay? And so in terms of how you understand, what that's communicating is the seriousness of the decision-making versus the flippancy with which Xerxes was making decisions. That contrast is very much on display as you walk through the book and notice that in its literary style. All right, so the king shows then, in the nature of the decree in this climax, you get full support of the queen and of the Jews. Okay? Full support. And then the means to do something, which is to write another decree to counteract the one. You can't rescind that one, but you can write a different one. Okay. However once you want to try to write a decree that will fix this decree, go for it. Now, this is really important to understand because this is that big problem that the book is written about. And this is how it is resolved. So what comes from this then, and that's what you have to do. We've made the decision, so now what do you do with that decision to make it come to fruition? That's what we have in verses 9 and 10. So the king's scribes were called at that time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded. Okay, notice Mordecai commanded. To the Jews, the satraps, okay, that was an official title of the leadership within the Persian Empire, the governors, and the princes of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces in all. Okay, we're recognizing the language. We're going to come back and take another look at that. To every province in its own script, to every people in their own language, and to the Jews in their own script and language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, sealed it with the king's signet ring, and sent letters by couriers on horseback, riding on royal horses bred from swift steeds. So what do we have to do? Well, it's not enough for a decision to be made. If you're a government official, I'm thinking here and I'm just, okay, here's what we're going to do. Well, there are some things you have to actually follow through on for that to ever make it out there and be policy, right? So that's what you have in this one. You have the climax is found in the decision made, but then the fall in action, the follow-up is, here's what has to happen as a result of that decision to enact this as policy. And the key things you saw, just as we saw earlier in the book, is you end up with an emphasis on it's going to go everywhere in the kingdom. Everywhere. It's going to be readily available and understandable to everyone. Especially, they're pulled out as distinct to the Jews. That they're going to get full. So everybody is going to have access to know this decree far and wide so that no one's left out. And then the nice thing is, and we saw this before, some of this is formulaic. We need to understand that for what is official language. But you send it by letters, by couriers on horseback, and the whole point is get it out there and known as swiftly as possible. Now, one of the interesting things, though, is in the 3rd month. So that's told us kind of where we are when some of this stuff started happening. So you've got the problem. So now we see, all right, if this all started that 1st month and you come down, you got the 3rd month. But here we are on this day, 23rd day, things are moving fast. Now, what month, though, was that original decree designed to affect? Do you remember? The 12th, that's right. It's the 12th, so it's the end of the year. So we've had all this tension among the Jews and what's going to happen with all that confusion going on in this short period of time. And now, though, we've got this whole almost 9 months, and it's just hanging out there. For almost 9 months, you've got 2 decrees, both from the kings and signed on the signet ring. One says, on this day, you can take up arms and kill the Jews and basically take whatever is theirs. And then you're going to have another decree that says, and the Jews, in that case, they can't do anything about it. But this second decree is the Jews, on the other hand, can defend themselves, fight back. So now put those 2 together. That's the situation because of the nature of Persian law. So they were almost confused around the palace with the first one. This counteracts it, but it doesn't rescind it. So now it's kind of, you want to fight the Jews, you better understand they can fight you back. It's not going to be easy pickings. So that's essentially what you have. If you're taking your life in your own hands if you choose to do this. That's the situation. So what it has done is it set up essentially, okay, well, there's going to be a fight. There's going to be a battle. Yes. Yes, and I do think, matter of fact, I don't know what else you could do in this situation except to say they can defend themselves. And at this point, now the important thing for us to think about here is in terms of, this is about story more than fact, but the fact that they know now they can defend themselves looking into the future, does that really change the complexion of their situation? Does that sufficiently change their situation or not? This is it's a lot to argue, really. It's big picture argumentation. The question is does this decision, and now they can fight back, does that take care and say, okay, because of this, the Jews have some form of protection from that original decree? But you don't know how well? Okay, so for you, we still don't have an ending yet. Okay, interesting. David? I tend to think that's what the idea is that you're going to have some limitations then of the people willing to go along with this. It's not a big, huge doctrinal question, but I'm going to make an argument later on that's a literary argument as to which one it is. All right, so let's continue on then. By these letters, the king permitted the Jews who were in every city to gather together and protect their lives. There's the specific about it. To destroy, kill, and annihilate. Remember that wording? All the forces of any people or province that would assault them. It is not Jews you get to go out and kill at will too. It's you get to defend and you can fight to death because that's what they're coming for you. Both little children and women. Oh, okay, there's some ethical questions here. And to plunder their possessions. Anybody that would assault them. So that means, though, if they would assault them, little children and the women, is you can defend the little children and the women who cannot defend themselves. even if they don't come at you directly. Did you catch that? To plunder their possessions, and that's going to be important. That's what they were going to do. They were coming in, and that was the benefit. Why would you get someone in? You can, hey, go fight the Jews. You can take their stuff. That was the incentive. On one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, there we have our time, which is the month of Adar, a copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province, okay, which was clear from the earlier part, and published for all people, also clear. Why? So that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So at this point, he's made it clear that anybody who's going to be attacking the Jews now, is what David's pointing out, they're taking their life in their own hands, and they've got to have some other kind of agenda with it, that this means something to them, and you're not going to just get the mercenaries necessarily the same way. The couriers who rode on royal horses went out, hastened, and pressed on by the king's command. Okay, so all of this, if you'll notice what this is a description of everything that was originally decided and written out is just being followed up on. Okay, that's all that's happened, and the decree was issued in Shushan the citadel. Okay, so it goes out everywhere, and we're going out right outside the palace. So here's what we have and where we stand. You've got this edict, it's written and it's sealed. That's okay, like being signed. That makes it official. They were sent then to officials throughout the empire. It permitted the Jews to fight back. Everybody gets copies, and it's proclaimed then within the capital itself. So this is all the action necessary to take a decision that was done in a private quarters of the king to then make it a public decree. That's all that has been shown here. Okay. Now let's look then at the last three verses, which is serving as the denouement. So Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor. And in every province and city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. Then many of the people of the land became Jews because fear of the Jews fell upon them. Now, that to me says that this situation has essentially been taken care of. We haven't had a fight yet, but when you've got Mordecai going out and people celebrating him, and you've got people that are knowledgeable about the decree just being made, and they're all happy about it, the later decree. And then you have the third reaction from people generally that they're becoming, if you know that the Jews are about to be attacked, does that make sense for you to say, you know what, I think I'll become a Jew right about now? If you think that, just stop and think about it. Okay, that would not make sense unless the confidence factor had shifted dramatically. All right? So what is the meaning? Now we'll look at the specifics of it, though. When he goes out from the presence of the king it says royal apparel. Okay, he gives this, he's going to describe this in of blue and white. The reason why blue and purple were considered just the colors, royal apparel, because the processes to make those colors in the ancient world were very expensive. It took quite a process in order to get those colors. So all of you people wearing purple today, we will ask for some favors and deign your good pleasure later. Okay. It was expensive to make that. And so those were considered royal colors as a result. Okay? But that's what is put on Mordecai. But he adds a great crown of gold. Now that's a different level, isn't it? Now, he's leaving the king. This is what the king is doing. Why is he doing this? What is this communicating? Mordecai has authority with the king's approval. Now, go back and think about chapter 6. Chapter 6 was when, after the king has the dream, and then he's trying to figure out how to honor the Mordecai because he couldn't sleep and everything, and they come and read to him, and then, I don't know why I thought dream, but he couldn't sleep. And now he's coming in, he's heard about Mordecai. Oh, we need to honor him. Here comes Haman. What do we need to do to honor him? And Haman lays it all out. And then that's what Mordecai gets. Part of it was to be attired with royal attire, right? So now what you're seeing is not just in that one situation did Mordecai have that honor. But now, after all of this, on the flip side of the ugliness and malice that we saw that Haman had for Mordecai, the king, on the other hand, has given him this, which is what Haman longed for. This is what Haman wanted. And that's what Mordecai gets, which again is another use of irony throughout the book. Then you have, and the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. That is direct opposite of the conclusion that happened in Shushan. Remember in chapter 3? The whole city is confused. They're like, yes, this makes sense. This is great. And so you have a different feeling. So you have the feeling of Mordecai. You have the feeling of the city generally. Now you get down and you have the Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor. So now we have, how do the Jews feel about this? They're ecstatic. Are you kidding me? We were supposed to just sit around and be killed? And now we can do something about it? That's great. And then in every province and city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness. Okay, so it went everywhere, but then it adds this, a feast and a holiday. Now, stop and think for just a second. Where are we now? Have we had the fight yet? No, but they stopped. They stopped to have a holiday just because of the decree. It was that big a deal. And that's also that anticipates what we talk about, the idea of a feast, going back to the whole idea of how feasting worked into the whole book. That was a response, not the time of the decision, it's a response to the decision here. Then many of the people of the land became Jews because fear of the Jews fell upon them. So now you have quite a response of conversion because of it, Gary. Yes. 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 Okay, good point. Yes. Is that and that plays into all of this, is that the Jews, to have this kind of reaction without anything taking place yet, if you didn't hear Gary, the point is, they had a lot of confidence in their ability to take care of themselves. For them, their survival was now assured. That's what I was trying to get at earlier, is just this decision, as far as they were determined on this, okay, we're going to survive this. And they had that confidence, and that confidence probably did play a role in all of this, what happened afterwards. Now, there's another thing that goes back to this that happened in chapter 4. In chapter 4, remember Mordecai's confidence that if Esther didn't do her part, he had confidence that their deliverance would arise anyway from some other place. And I asked you at the time, how could he have that kind of confidence? And my argument is that because of the seed promise. God had promised that the seed was coming. Hadn't happened. And if it hadn't happened yet, but God said it would, and it required the existence of the Jewish nation, then guess what? I can know for sure. We're going to survive this. And now, because of that determination and faith on Mordecai's part, the actions and courage of Esther, and now with the decree going out, everything shifts so that now people are seeing that move, and now the rest of them are, I think, starting to get it. So that sense of confidence that God will take care of them, we haven't had God mentioned in this book, remember. We'll come back to that later. But the sense of understanding of themselves and their role is present in this book. And I think that's a major factor in the reasons why. So, we had Mordecai clothed in royal apparel. You got the city excited again. The Jews are happy and confident. Throughout the empire, the Jews are rejoicing, and their influence is such, and from this, everything is turning the Jews' direction. That's the point here, is that we've gone from everything seemingly being against them. Now, think about this. We start with, don't tell them you're a Jew. That's in chapter 2. To everybody wants to be a Jew. I'm exaggerating, but that's a big shift in terms of the understanding of where they stood as a people within this group. So, what we now have, and that bell's about to ring, I would argue this point now, we've reached the climax of the book. Everything has been set up now for essentially for the Jews' survival. And so you've had the ruler humble the antagonist and honor the sage. The heroine Esther has exposed the antagonist Haman and his scheme so that Xerxes, Ahasuerus, had him executed. Again, irony throughout. And now you reach this climax, I think, with a decree that's designed to overcome the monster, that's what this overall story is, of essentially Haman's Holocaust plans. So all of that's been thwarted. So for their point of view, this is now, it's just the details. Everything has reached the point of where the confidence level of we're not going anywhere, the fighting is just the details. That understanding changes how you see how the book is put together. So we will pick up there in 2 weeks. I'm going to be speaking somewhere else next week. So you have to wait. Come back, tune in next time, chapter 9.